I want to welcome everybody to the webinar on effective claims management. Just want to go over a few housekeeping things. I'm your host. Today I'll be hosting the panel. My name is Greg Hamlin. I'm the Senior Vice President of Claims and Chief Claims Officer for Berkley Industrial Comp. And I've been here with Berkley for about 6 years, a little over 6 years now, and been in the industry over about 20, starting as an adjuster and serving in various roles to the position I'm in now. I want to go over, before I introduce our panel, just some basic housekeeping items. First of all, the webinar will be recorded and we will send the link later. So if there's something in this that you want to go back and listen to again, or you know someone who wasn't able to make it that would like to hear it, we will provide that afterwards. The other thing too is we are going to have polls and quizzes throughout the webinar. And the purpose of those are to do a few things. One, help us know what you're finding that's valuable, and also allow you the opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar. And we may not get to all of those, but we will try to take some of those, and afterwards we'll follow up with answers to the ones we may not have gotten to. Your feedback on those questions will be anonymous, so don't be afraid if you there are no dumb questions, and all the participation we can get helps. Finally, there will be a survey sent at the end of the webinar. You may even get it towards the end of the session. I would truly appreciate it if you could respond to that so that we can get more information about how the value of this particular webinar and perhaps future opportunities that we could provide for you. So that helps us get better. We're always looking for ways to service our policyholders, our injured workers, and everybody that we interact with, and that feedback is really important. So now that all of the housekeeping is out of the way, I'd love to introduce our panel of guests. So I'm super excited about the group that I have here, and that I get the opportunity to work with all of these fantastic people every day. And I often say I have the best team in the country, so you're going to get a chance to meet these amazing people. First off, we have Hope Rametta. She is our Director of Claims over our catastrophic unit. Hope and I have had the opportunity to work together across multiple companies, and we started within a few months of each other. So really grateful for the time that I've had to work with Hope. So Hope, if you want to say hello to everybody.
Hi, welcome. Super excited to be here.
Next up is Quinetta Leapart. She also works with me in our Birmingham office. She is a nurse by trade, but not only that, she is just a fantastic human being. If you ever get a chance to meet her outside of here, you certainly should. She's got the biggest heart of anyone I know, and as many nurses do. And so we're excited to have her medical expertise on this panel. So if you want to say hello to everybody, Q, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Greg, and welcome to the webinar.
And finally, we have Chris Drake, otherwise known as the Dragon. I was hearing that was a nickname at his prior employer, so I thought I would bring that in. Chris brings lots of years of experience. He's a seasoned manager on our team, managing claims all across the United States in many different jurisdictions. So we're excited to have his take on claims management as well. Chris, if you want to say hello, that'd be great.
I should probably start by talking about the Dragon piece, right? So my last name is Drake. Someone misconfused it for Dragon at one point, so that's what happened. There's nothing real funny about that. Another side note that you guys need to know is I am in the Indianapolis area, which is significantly closer to Bloomington than it is South Bend. So we are absolutely pulling for the Hoosiers over the Irish coming up. So if you guys are Irish fans, I'm sorry for you. But looking forward to talking to everybody.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and for those who don't know, I'm down in Alabama, and Hope with Quinetta, and Hope is in Lexington, Kentucky. But 3 of the 4 of us are Indiana grads. So Quinetta's an Alabama grad. My daughter's there too, so I will say roll Tide. But they didn't make the playoffs. So poor Alabama. So let's talk about claims management now that we've introduced everybody. This is a topic that comes up a lot. And I think as we think about whether you're a policyholder, an agent, or you're trying to figure out how to manage risk within your organization, claims management is really important. And I think sometimes there's a thought process that claims management is the type of thing that the claims are what they are and they cost what they cost. And I think we're going to really try to shed some light on some of those myths and talk about how you can control your own destiny and how your carrier can better support you on that. So that's the purpose today as we talk about claims management. And so I wanted to kick this off with Hope to talk about claims management. When you think about claims management, Hope, what comes to mind to you, and how would you describe that from your experience in the industry?
Yeah, so I would say, I think generally speaking, people that aren't in the industry probably would think claims management once an accident's happened, right? But I actually see it far before that. I see claims management starting with the safety culture of the employer. When you have a solid safety culture, you're less likely to have complacency. You're more likely to have injured workers take their time and utilize their PPE and their safety. My team that I manage is all catastrophic injuries, and I got to tell you, the majority of the cases that we see could be prevented. And it really could be prevented by wearing our safety, our safety harnesses, our safety gear. But we're busy, right? We start working fast. We want to get things done. We want to go home. But when we have a culture that has a strong focus on that from the employer's perspective, we oftentimes see that mitigates one, accidents even occurring, but then two, the severity of it, right? We may still see an accident, but instead of, plummeting 30 feet, he may have fell 10 feet from the rope, right? And the rope caught him. So maybe we're now looking at a cervical strain as opposed to death or quadriplegic, paraplegic, so on and so forth. That goes to, once an accident does happen, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but report. Our claims people are only as good as the claims that we have and that we know about and that we have the opportunity to mitigate. So reporting is huge. And then doing a thorough investigation. Once we do have it, what is a thorough investigation? As much detail as possible. Details matter. And the best people to get the details are the boots on the ground, right? When the injury occurs, when you have that strong safety culture, that also goes into post-accident investigations, right? You're really gathering all the information as to what happened, how it occurred, how can we mitigate future instances. But then also who was around the injured worker, right? It's also important for us to understand what led up to that event, right? Sometimes we see that maybe the person's been disciplined recently, or maybe there's a long history of that. Those type of things can be helpful from an investigative perspective. And the sooner we report, the sooner we can get them into medical treatment, right? And oftentimes our medical report is our best, what I want to say, it's written history, if you will, of what the injured worker states happened, right? When they first see the doctor, which is really important in terms of body parts and how the accident happens, and helps us utilize that information down the line. And then also, there are a couple of things that I think about from an investigation standpoint, is our ability to mitigate the claims by obtaining the information early. So for example, drug screens, right? Drug screens, if not done, we still have the opportunity to get them done. But we can only do that if we have the claim in time to get the specimens preserved. So by that, I mean, when they go to the hospital for that ER visit, right? They're drawing blood, and perhaps you asked for a post-accident drug screen, perhaps you didn't, and that's okay. But we have the ability to test after the fact with the specimen that was taken at the hospital. But hospitals have their standards of destroying that evidence, right? You know, they're not going to keep those specimens around for all of their patients. So the sooner we have the claim, the sooner that we can obtain that information. And then, of course, quality medical care. Quinetta's going to chat about this a little bit later, but the sooner that we can get them into a good physician also gives us the opportunity to either direct care in states that allow us to direct, and then also allows us to soft direct, right? There's states that injured workers get to choose their own treatment, their own physicians. But when you can start creating a rapport early on, that allows us to have the opportunity to get them in with really good providers through soft direct or direct. And then I think about, how do we get the guy back to work, right? Our injured worker back to work, and having solid return to work programs. Because the ultimate goal is let's accept the cases that we're supposed to be accepting, dispute the cases that we shouldn't be paying, right? Get the injured workers our really good medical treatment and get them back to work as soon as we can get them back to work, right? And there's lots of things that go into that. But I think that those are like the big ones for me that stand out in my brain when I think about claims management.
I love that, Hope. And you hit on several things that I think are just so important. When you were talking about, you know, the importance of reporting, all of these things that she discussed when she was talking about drug screens and witnesses. I can't tell you how many times in my career in a leadership role that we've gotten a claim a month, 2 weeks late, 6 months late. The witnesses are gone. The drug screen is passed. And it puts us in a difficult situation because we're trying to put the pieces together after the fact. And a lot of times those pieces are gone. So I think you hit on some really important things about how important it is that as an employer, you're being proactive beforehand, during, and after to make sure that you're working with your carrier to get the information that you need so we can get the best outcome. That's always the goal on our part. You know, you mentioned a little bit about the medical piece. And when I think about claims management, there's a lot of components to that. Sometimes we think about the disability management, the investigation, but I wanted to have Quinetta on here to talk a little bit about the medical treatment, because again, those outcomes can vary so much for the exact same injury, depending on the medications they're on, the doctor they go to, so many different things. Quinetta, can you talk to us a little bit about medical treatment and how you can help injured workers get those best outcomes?
Sure. So what we first want to do is look at the injury itself. How did this happen? What happened? Did anybody see what happened? So that we can kind of collaborate and get the information straight and then find out where they went from there. So did we go by ambulance? Did we go to the hospital? Did we just go to urgent care? What level of treatment is also very important. It also tells us a lot about the injury. Then we want to obtain the treatment records. We want to obtain diagnostics, what treatment was rendered so that we can make the best decision for the plan of care. We'll talk a little bit about adding nurses to visits where they can also help us out with providing information. We also need to know the medical history. What is going on in their past or currently? Do they have cardiac issues? Are you diabetic? We want to know if healing is going to be slower than normal, if they've got a history of cardiac problems, high blood pressure, blood clots. All of these would impact our injury so that we can know the best treatment plan to get them moving forward and back to work as quick as possible. Then we want to monitor that plan as we move forward throughout the treatment. Once they discharge from the hospital, what's next? Are we just seeing doctors? Do we need therapy? Do we need further diagnostics so that we can ensure that they're getting the best treatment possible? Because at the end of the day, we want everybody to be happy and healthy and back to work as quick as possible. But the only way we're going to be able to do that is to get our injured workers healthy with the best treatment options that there are out there.
Love that, Quinn. And the other thing that I have seen throughout my career is a lot of times this is a confusing process for people. Not everybody has had a surgery before or had to be hospitalized. And so managing that medical treatment and walking them through the steps so that they can understand it is so important.
Right.
So I appreciate that. Chris, I wanted to talk a little bit about return to work and why that's important. Some of our insureds or different insureds I've worked with throughout my career sometimes have concerns about bringing people back to work because either they're worried to bring them back to the job, or they're thinking, let's not bring them back until they're 100%. We don't need them out there getting hurt in the yard. Talk to us a little bit about return to work and why a good return to work program is important when you're talking about claims management.
Yeah, it's a good question, Greg. So early intervention and proactive return to work programs are key factors in increasing the likelihood of successful return to work. I could absolutely nerd out and talk the rest of this time about the benefits of return to work programs. I'll give you 3 key themes that I think stand out to me. The first is we've seen better outcomes when an injured worker returns to a light duty position and then transition into that full duty release, full duty job versus being entirely out of work at home for a set period of time and then jumping right back into that full duty job. Some people may handle that. They may be able to go on the rest of their claim and they're done. But then you may have others that get back and they may have increased pain while doing their job. They're deconditioned, they go right back out of work. Well, that leads to increased TTD days and increased claim cost. The second is there's been numerous studies conducted on this over the years, but the overwhelming evidence points to the fact that the longer an employee is out of work, the less likely they are to return to work to that employer. That to me is absolutely significant because you're not only incurring the TTD cost, the overall claim cost, but you're setting yourself up for potential for vocational rehab and retraining. So according to one of the studies, the percentage of injured workers that had returned to work at the 6-week mark was approximately 50%. So half of the workers at the 6-week mark were able to return to work. And that can decrease over time to as low as 25% at the 12-week mark. Now, I mean, you got to take into consideration this could vary based on the individual, the motivation level, the physical demand limits of their job, and the overall injury. But if you look at the overall percentage, that to me is absolutely eye-catching and just illustrates the importance of having a solid return to work program. And then finally, you can't overstate the benefit of having employee morale. So light duty return to work affords the employer the opportunity to see the injured worker on a daily basis again, to observe how they're doing, and to take an active interest in partnership in just their overall recovery. So when they're watching them do tasks that are doing light duty, are they handling it well? Is there a situation where maybe that's too difficult for them and they can pivot a little bit and come up with a different light duty position? Or are they presenting as if they're asymptomatic, they're doing really well, to where we can then go to the treating physician and see if we can negotiate a full duty release. But ultimately, people are going to want to return to work more when there's a good work environment, they have a good relationship with their employer, and they feel that the employer cares about them and takes an active path in their recovery as well. So if you look at the big picture, you're not only reducing the financial burden on the injured worker because they're able to go back to their regular job at their normal hours and wages, but you're also reducing the claim cost because you're mitigating that lost time and your TTD exposure.
Thanks, Chris. I think, I've heard it said objects in motion tend to stay in motion, and getting a stopped object to move takes a lot more work than keeping a moving object moving. And I think that applies to our injured workers. I always call it the vacation syndrome. Like if I have a nice vacation with my family, we go down to Dolphin Island, hang out on the beach. And then that Monday morning comes around where it's time to go back to work. I love my job. I'm actually pretty passionate about what I do. But I think about it when I'm on the beach, I'm like, man, Monday's going to stink. I'm going to have all this stuff to do. I'm going to be behind. But then I get in and I see the faces, the people I work with, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember why I love this. And I think sometimes for our injured workers, that same thing happens. A lot of, I would say, at least in our particular book of business, the vast majority of our injured workers are legitimately hurt, but I think when they're off for long periods of time, that mindset can set in, and once it sets in, it's very hard to overcome it. So I'm glad that you hit on that, Chris. One of the things that we hear a lot, and I think all of us who have been in the claims industry for a long time have heard it, is there's often a lot of frustration when an injured worker goes off on an injury. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that either they made it up or they lied or this is a terrible employee. All of those things come up. And really, one of the things that we're starting to recognize in the industry over the last 10 years, I would say for our company, the last 5, is how important mindset and empathy play in people's recovery and what those relationships feel and look like between the adjuster and the injured worker, as well as the insured and the injured worker. And Hope, I would love for you to talk a little bit about where you think empathy fits into that.
Yeah, so I think empathy in the claims world, I've been in the industry for 20 years, and back in the day when I first started, claims was very much process oriented. We were very check the box mentality. You're just you're the processor, right? You're gathering the information, you're moving the case along. It has changed and developed so much in the last 20 years. And to your point, we've seen that bringing empathy and seeing our injured workers as human, as we all are, changes the outcomes we have overall in the cases. It changes their viewpoint of their perspective on insurance companies. And honestly, it makes the adjusters have more fun with work, right? Because when you get to have really good conversations and get to know and understand your people, it just makes things more enjoyable. And what does that look like, right? How do we have empathy in the claims world? First and foremost, we encourage our adjusters to ask a lot of questions and have a conversation to understand the injured worker. We're not doing it to check boxes. We really want to understand them and their circumstances, right? Our injured workers are people. They have families. They have kiddos. They've got maybe other responsibilities other than work and their family. That when the injury occurs, it doesn't just happen to them, right? It happens to their family, and it can affect most, if not all, of your aspects of life, right? Depending upon the severity of the injury. So we need to treat them as such, right? I think back in the day, we used to think of it, well, they hurt their elbow and we just need to focus on the elbow. Well, no, that elbow's attached to a person. And we need to understand that person so that we can get those good return to work outcomes. We can get them the right medical treatment they're seeking. And it helps us understand what barriers we may have, right? If we know that they live alone and they don't have any family and they're pretty isolated, that tells me that psych could be part of it, not meaning accepted on the claim, but I'm saying that their mindset might be more challenging to overcome, right? We might have more of that vacation mindset, as Greg previously mentioned. It also tells me that that person doesn't have help at home, right? So if we've got this person, not able to ambulate really well, then what resources is he or she going to need in order to progress in his or her recovery? And that kind of goes back to having conversations and not speaking from a script when we're talking to our injured workers. I think we oftentimes, when we get really comfortable in claims, and this is our world, we use big insurance terms and not terms that everybody understands. And that's not only with our injured workers, but it could be with our insureds, right? Or even our providers that we're working with. Not everybody's savvy in this environment. And so really taking the time to speak to your audience, right? Changing your language, helping explain, allowing time for questions, those type of things. So one of the things that we've done here at Berkley, a big thing for us has been we kind of challenged our team I guess a couple years ago now, and we continue to challenge them to find ways where we can bring empathy into the claims process. And we started off, the first thing we did was we have initial letters that go out to our injured workers when an injury occurs. We're basically just telling them, hey, here's the process of claims, right? This is what you can expect. However, it was written all in legal insurance terms, right? Terms that unless you see it day to day, there's no way you're going to fully comprehend what's happening, right? So we rewrote that letter and really broke it down. Like, what if I didn't know anything about insurance, right? What if I don't understand any of this? How would I want it explained to me? And what are my resources when I have questions, right? So we revamped that, and that's been really helpful. I think that even allows our injured workers to know what questions to ask, right? You understand what you're reading, you can then ask follow-up questions to better understand things. I think when we're taking the time to have really good communication with our injured workers, we're genuinely, when I say good communication, we genuinely care, right? We care about their well-being. We care about getting them good medical treatment, because we all want the same thing, right? The outcome we all want for the injured worker to get back to life, right? They probably want that the most, right? They're not excited this happened to them. So, working with them, the open lines of communication, that builds trust, right? The more trust you have in the claims process, the smoother it will go, right? The less likely you are to have non-compliance in treatment. You're far more likely to have an engaged employee, or injured worker, I should say, both at work and in his or her insurance claim. And then when we have trust, when we've built that trust, that decreases litigation, right? I think what we've seen is that even on some of our biggest CAT cases, we're able to maintain pro se injured workers. Why? Because they have really good relationships with our adjusters. Our adjusters genuinely care about their well-being. Now, that should not be from an employer side, that should not be confused with we're giving our injured workers anything they want, right? This is not what that means. What it means is that we're treating them as a human. We're helping them understand the process. When we're making decisions that we need to make, even if they're not the decisions the injured worker wants to hear, right? Like perhaps we're not going to approve something for a reason, or maybe we have to deny their claim, right? But you can have those conversations with empathy. You can have those conversations in a way in which it allows them to understand your thought process and what did you do to come to that conclusion, right? They may not like it, right? But at least those conversations and the litigation surrounding that is usually decreased, in the sense of there's less animosity and more understanding. So a couple other things we do here, and this is my favorite topic, so I could talk about this forever. But I think one of the things that we do, we do lots of things here at Ben that promote working with empathy. But one of the fun things that we do is that sometimes we send our injured workers cookies, which seems kind of silly, right? Like it kind of seems like, especially with the industry our book of business, we tend to have a very high male populated industry. They're usually blue collared workers. So here we are sending them a box of cookies, right? It kind of seems a little silly, but one of our employees a couple years ago said, it feels really good when somebody thinks of me and sends me something, right? Even if it's just a card, whatever it might be. And somebody had the thought of, given the industry we work in, maybe flowers isn't the best thing, right? So, hey, let's see if we can do cookies. And so we've partnered with Cheryl's Cookies to sometimes if they're having surgery, or maybe we know they're struggling with something, the whole point of it is to show them that we care and that we see you, right? Everybody wants to be seen, heard, and valued. And that only helps promote that trust and that connection. We also do letters. We have little, in fact, I have one on my desk, these little recovery cards. These just take your recovery one step at a time, get well cards that we like to send out. Maybe that's a return to work. Maybe we're congratulating them on something. Maybe we just want to tell them we're thinking about them, right? Because it feels good when people care, right? And we genuinely care, right? We all want the same outcome. We want to see the injured worker get better. We want to see them get back to life, get back to work. And as a result of that, we get good financial outcomes, right, for our stakeholders.
I appreciate that, Hope. I really believe in this. This has been something that I too am very passionate about, is the importance of gaining cooperation with our injured workers, and empathy is a big piece of that. I think it's a scary thing for an industry that's done things a certain way for a very long time. There's a concern that, well, if we show empathy, then we're writing blank checks. And that's not the goal here. The goal is to gain cooperation, and in doing so, obtain a better outcome. And I'm gonna, since we have time, I would love for Hope just to talk briefly about a case. We'll keep some of the facts general. We're going to be sharing it in a future podcast coming up this next year on our podcast Adjusted. But we have an injured worker who went through a very difficult injury in a state where we can't direct care. And so that could be a challenge sometimes when we're in states where people can go where they want, do what they want. Sometimes there's a feeling of, well, we can't do anything about it. Hope, do you mind talking just a little bit about this case?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be vague about it, but the underlying message of it is that our adjuster worked with empathy, right? So this gentleman sustained an amputation. We had him at a Centers of Excellence, which is fantastic. Centers of Excellence are the best places you can get treatment across the country. And he just wasn't getting what he needed. He just wasn't. When you're talking about prosthetics, there is a wide range of prosthetics that can be chosen, and depending upon what your needs are, that can change, right? And he desperately wanted to go back to work. In fact, post amputation, he went back to work for a hot minute before the union kind of stepped in and said that wasn't going to take place, which was okay. But now it kind of put him in high gear. Like, what do I need to do to get back to work? Super motivated guy. And our adjuster really, has a phenomenal relationship with him. So much so that he's sharing these things, right? He's sharing his frustrations. He's sharing what it is that he can do and can't do with his current prosthetic. And we had, through networking, we had built a relationship with another prosthetic company who has been doing some pretty great things through working through empathy, right? This is what their kind of model is based off of. And we had connected with them, and I had suggested the adjuster reach out to him to see what can happen. And sure enough, the injured worker, because he trusted this adjuster, and our other prosthetic company felt like they could really help and provide a better usage of prosthetic, which then improves your life, right? So we all agreed to send them. He actually traveled, him and his wife. We flew them there. They really, the prosthetic company for a week worked with him on site. He got to work with the prosthesis every day, and they got to tweak it on site. And that, because that other company that we were working with really works from a place of empathy and wants to look at different ways. How can we get this guy back to regular life, right? Let's make him as whole as we can possibly make him, right? When he's had an amputation. And they were able to work with a company that actually allowed him to go out and use his prosthesis on the equipment of which he would be working with on a day-to-day basis. So he got to in person be tweaking his prosthetic while mimicking, right? Because he's using the same equipment, doing the job, right? So by the time this guy left after a week, he was on cloud 10. He was felt whole, if you will. He could not speak highly enough about the opportunity he was given. And I think that kind of goes back to when we're working with empathy, we're not putting ourselves in a box, right? We're not checking the box. We're not just processing things. We're really looking at the injured workers holistically. We're trying to see what's the best solution for this person, right? Because another person in his situation could have a completely different need and outcome, right? But what this is going to mean so not only is this gentleman living life to its fullest, right? And has been sharing pictures with us of him doing a lot of different things. Is that he now has the opportunity to go back in a full duty capacity within the union, of which they were not going to allow because he couldn't do things with his prior prosthesis. And he's in a jurisdiction where that changes a case from being a couple $100,000 for PPD to 800, 900 grand. So I think this is a good example of when we show up and we do the right thing, we treat people with kindness, respect, and empathy, that we get really good outcomes, right? We get good outcomes, the injured worker gets good outcomes. It's just overall a really good thing. And it makes it fun. It's always, it feels good to help people, right? And that doesn't mean giving away the kitchen sink.
Well, and Hope, I'll add to that story. The prosthesis he ended up with was actually $100,000 cheaper than the one he was going to have. And we weren't looking for a cheaper result. We were looking for a functional result. And so, great story, great example of how we can use that to build trust and get a better outcome that is going to cause the injured worker to have a better life and is also going to be less expensive overall as he's able to return to his work. And that should be the goal. That should be the goal with everything we do as we think about claims management. I want to pivot from the empathy a little bit, Chris, to talk about, you've been doing this a long time and you've seen when good claims go bad. In your perspective, Chris, what causes claims to spin out of control? What are some of the things that probably could have stopped that? It's always easy afterwards to go back and see, oh my gosh, this is where the claim took a left-hand turn.
Yeah, and there's countless number of them. Not all claims are cookie cutter claims, right? Like you can look at one claim and it's completely different based on who the injured worker is. There's so many other factors, but comorbids is always one that we see frequently. So diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, smoking, you name it. Each one of these individually could lead to a longer recovery time. They're having a delay in their overall recovery, which leads to extended time off from work, which what does that directly impact? Your increase in TTD days and also your overall claim cost. Secondly, the comorbid could actually even be a barrier in the end game to return to work, requiring an accommodation. And then you also run the risk of developing additional complications. Are they going to develop an infection? Are we having some uncontrolled diabetes on an extremity injury that results in an amputation? So it could just seem like a straightforward claim that's spiraled because of some comorbid conditions. The second is incidental findings on diagnostics and exams. You could have a perfectly healthy person, totally asymptomatic prior to the injury, treating with a physician for a soft tissue injury. They decide they want to go ahead and get diagnostics. Diagnostics may come back and it's positive for chronic degenerative issues. Well, treating physician at that point may decide that, they're asymptomatic before the injury. So this work injury aggravated or exacerbated that condition, and you may be buying treatment at least temporarily, or in some states, for the life of the claim or for the life of that individual, you may take that on. Similarly, you have the potential for body creep. So if you have let's say somebody has a hand injury, it's a cumulative trauma, repetitive trauma type of injury, it could morph into your elbow. Then they're having symptomology in the shoulders. We do typically see a lot play off from the neck pathology to the shoulder, back and forth. And you could also have the overcompensation component. Somebody has a right leg injury and they start favoring that and using the left, putting more weight on the left. So then the left is incorporated in the claim too. So instead of having one body part, you're getting double, which all leads to increased cost in the claim. And then I think the third component for me is you have the work environment, the employment status. Were they terminated? Was there a change in the work status? How's the relationship with their employer? Do they have a positive relationship, or has it deteriorated over time? And then third, if there's a change in light duty accommodation, say they can no longer accommodate, then we would anticipate the claim cost to go up at that point. So each one of them can materially impact the claim on their own. You start adding all those together, and you're starting to get into some significant increase in the cost.
Thanks, Chris. So I want to kind of pivot, but before I do want to remind people we would love to hear your questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to send them in so that we can add those to the webinar or answer afterward. But I want to pivot from what causes the claims to go out of control to Quinetta's role. She, working as a nurse, Quinetta, you're talking to these injured workers regularly. You understand some of the friction points that you see as you're working with them. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that. What causes friction on a claim as they're going through their medical treatment?
Yeah, so just to touch back on what Hope said about being empathetic and putting yourself in that injured worker's shoes, we have to realize that they're people too. It affects their wife, their kids, and everybody in the household. So what we want to do is place ourselves in their shoes and think about those tests that are being ordered. Think about what the injured worker is saying. When we don't use that empathetic resolution model, it builds distrust, and people always want to trust who they're talking to. Sometimes a particular treatment request will send for utilization review, or maybe have to discuss with defense prior to that. Let's just say maybe they don't particularly care to do closed MRIs. A lot of people are claustrophobic, and we need to find like either an open MRI center that's closer to them and work with them through those struggles. Or if there's none available, go back to that doctor and ask what treatment options are available if they are unable to participate, and just think about that. Also, maybe using utilization review, maybe for physical therapy requests that come across and they're not getting better and they're not getting better, and maybe approaching that subject with doctors if those particular treatments that are being ordered are not necessarily helping. What else can we do? Which other directions can we go based on the particular injury? Maybe when we're unable to obtain hospital records, office visit notes, we don't know the treatment plan, how can we help you direct care or get you the care that you need? We have to think about things from a perspective of if this particular injured worker is looking to go back to work, maybe they need a prosthetic, but they're a little bit hesitant. I know we've had injured workers in the past be embarrassed. Maybe they lost a finger and they don't want people to see, or we have to kind of work through what's functional and what's cosmetic. Maybe it would just help them to have the appearance of a finger, but just working through those things that can be challenges. Like if we don't have the records, how can we get them? What can we do? What other tests can be ordered? If certain treatments aren't working, going back to that doctor and just broaching those subjects with the medical team to find the best treatment options for them.
I really love what you talked there about trust, Quinetta, because I do think that's a huge part of getting a good outcome on a claim. It's been a long time ago, but I remember getting my wisdom teeth out after high school, and they put me under for this procedure, and we went to the pharmacy directly after to get my medications. And at the time, it was my girlfriend driving me to the pharmacy, and I had my insurance card and whatever. But I think I was still under the medications, and we were there for 20 minutes or half an hour. I can't remember how long, trying to get these medications. And I remember crying in the pharmacy, probably related to the drugs, about why are we still here? Why do I not have my medicine? It's really easy to forget what it feels like to be on the other side of what they're going through. And I think trust is a big component. And if we forget that piece, that people do need their medications, they want their treatment. And if something isn't approved, going through the process to explain why that is and what the next steps are so that we can make sure we're getting the right care is huge. So I love what you hit on there, Quinetta. I know you talked about this earlier, Hope, but I think it's worth going back to the importance of timely reporting. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm very passionate about this topic. Report, report, report. I can't say that enough. There's a multitude of reasons for it. But I think that one, the most important thing is getting the injured worker what they need, right, from a medical perspective. And we kind of go back to how can we mitigate or make good decisions from a compensability decision. By that, I mean whether or not we're accepting a case, is by gathering the evidence of how the accident occurred, and all of those things. That goes back to the medical treatment, right? The quicker we can get them medical treatment, not only are they receiving it, regardless of who's paying for it, right? They're getting what they need. But it's also creating a record of what injuries are actually occurred, what body parts are involved. It's going to create a record of how the accident happened. It may not have a ton of detail, but at least oftentimes will, for example, if he's claiming a left knee down the road and we're like, no, we've got this ER report that shows this was just your right shoulder, right? So it creates a record really early on. So the quicker we can get the medical treatment. And then going back to the drug screens, and I don't know why this has been such a big thing in the last couple of years, but man, I'm telling you what, drug screens have been positive. So many positive drug screens, which is insane, and more so than I remember in my, any other time in my career. And I'm not sure what the factor is for that, but I think what it does tell us is that one, post-accident drug screens are important, but they need to be on the day of accident, right? The soonest we can get them to the injury, the better. And again, if you're not requesting the post-accident drug screen, that's okay in the sense that if they're at an ER and their specimens being pulled, we can preserve those. However, again, we've got to have the claim as soon as it happens. Any time that goes on past that, the more days that pass past the accident, the less likely we are to utilize that as a defense. And many states, not all, but many states have some type of defense to intoxication and safety violations. It may not be a denial in its totality of the claim, but in some states it would reduce benefits. So it's really important because, again, it goes back to paying what we owe and not paying what we don't owe, right? So we want to make sure that we're really doing that thorough investigation, but we can't do that if we don't have the claim, right? And then I go back to how the accident occurred, right? I mean, think about something that happened 3 weeks ago, right? Do you remember every detail that happened? Or do you have kind of this vague sense of what happened, right? So as time goes on, our memory changes, right? Or maybe our memory gets a little bit more specific. That helps support our current injuries, right? Or perhaps we just don't know, and the less information we have up front, the less we can utilize that information to really, one, get them the treatment that they need, the appropriate treatment they need, and two, pay what we owe, right? And not pay what we owe. We want to be able to defend what we shouldn't be paying for. So when he comes back to us and says, hey, I know my right shoulder was injured, but my left knee is bothering me. Well, we would have, if we were able to get the claim as soon as possible and gather all the appropriate information that we could, we would be able to show, okay, I hear you. I understand this. I understand that this is how you fell, and here's the records to it. And here's all the documents that support it, right? Like, here's the supporting evidence as to why we're not going to pay for it, right? And then, of course, that helps us in litigation, right? It's hard to defend a case when you have litigation, when you have very few facts, right? So the more evidence that we can provide our legal team to defend our cases when appropriate, the better. And then two, when you report timely, you're going back to a good investigation. We're not only wanting to know from the injured worker what happened, but we want to know from all the people around them, right? If they were working with Joe and John that day, we want to make sure that we know who Joe and John are. We want to get their statements up front, because sometimes 3 weeks from now, Joe and John don't work there anymore, right? And now we don't have their statements, and we don't know how to get a hold of them. We can't utilize this. We think that it didn't happen that way. We don't think that this is related, but then now we've lost our evidence to support it, right? Or our opportunity to create the evidence, or to obtain the evidence to support it. And then I will say one last thing on this topic. Most states have a statute that talks about timely reporting. All right. So when I say that, timely reporting to a state, it's when the insured or the employer is notified, right? So if Joe Smith comes up to you and says, hey, I sprained my ankle, and you're like, it's not a big, not a big deal. He doesn't want treatment, whatever. And you're like, I'm not going to report this, right? Well, if Joe Smith comes back 3 weeks from now and says, hey, you know how I said I sprained my ankle? I really want to go to the doctor now because it's just not resolving on its own, right? So then you're like, okay, now he's getting medical treatment. I'm going to go tell my carrier about it, right? Well, the problem is in that state, hypothetically, is that there's a 14-day window for an insurance company to make a decision on compensability. That 14 days did not start when they received notice, meaning when the insurance company received notice. That 14-day clock started when you were notified on the date of accident that the injured worker was injured. So now we've lost our opportunity to dispute the claim. Maybe not in its entirety, but certainly harps us, if you will, in terms of our ability to defend. And then let's say you do it within the, we have a 14-day window, we get it on day 7. Well, now our people only have 7 calendar days, not working days, calendar days, to gather all the evidence, which is quite the process to make the right decision.
Thanks, Hope. I really, really, really would stress how important it is to report your claims timely. If you didn't get that from her message, I will reiterate, it is so important because, again, as a criminal justice major, Hope is one as well. Stories change. The sooner we can get the stories nailed down, the better. And the facts change. So we want to get that early. We want to do the right thing by the injured worker, right thing by the employer, right thing for everybody involved. So the sooner we get that, the sooner we can move forward. Before we move on, I want to add one more thing on that topic. One more thing. I'm also very passionate about this topic, if you haven't noticed. The one other thing that I would add is that, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. I'll come back to you. When it comes back.
I had it and I lost it. So sorry.
No problem. We're getting close to time, so I want to make sure we cover everything. Chris, I did want to just touch base on this briefly. Subrogation. Sometimes people are getting hurt in these accidents, and maybe there's a guard missing on a machine, or there's another car involved, or any number of things. A tire explodes, and we get the claim late, and we don't maybe have all the information. of course, in workers' comp always comes first. So it's going to be our problem first. But we can go back and subrogate and get our money back, Chris. What are some of the things that employers need to be mindful of so that we don't end up in a spot where somebody else is liable, but we're stuck paying and there's no way to get our money back?
Yeah, I think you hit right on the money. Preserving evidence is absolutely crucial. It provides the necessary proof to establish the liability and support a claim. Most of the evidence people are familiar with, pretty straightforward, right? Accident reports, photographs, video, witness statements, damaged property, etc. All that stuff can prove another party's negligence. So one of the most common mistakes that we see is that an insured writes it off from the jump because they think, well, this is going to be a low dollar claim. It's not really going to matter. They opt not to investigate, not to collect evidence, assuming they're not going to get a large recovery from it. So it may not seem like much at the beginning or at the onset, but it absolutely could snowball into a much larger exposure, as we talked about on some of those other claims. But I think it's a perfect example of your failure to properly retain the damaged evidence jeopardized your ability to pursue that third party. But if you have a robust collection of the evidence, it just further strengthens that position. And just here's a case example. You have a maintenance person that's performing routine maintenance on a machine. They follow the manufacturer's lockout tagout procedure. So the machine's turned off. They start doing the maintenance. Somehow the machine kicks on, or it malfunctions to the point it causes a crush injury or an amputation. Well, what happens if there's no manufacturer defect? There's no known policy on that. You just chalk it up to, that sucks. We're going to take a loss. We're going to move on. Instead, what you could have been doing is you could have been preserving the evidence, having an investigation done of the machine to determine there was a malfunction, because then you're going to be able to put yourself in the best position to pursue liability against the manufacturer. And I think Hope hit on it with the investigation. It kind of goes in lockstep, right? So your work comp investigation and then your subrogation investigation, details matter. Details matter. You cannot stress that enough. Like every little fact specific thing is going to help your position. And then also reporting it timely. That's the second point I wanted to go over, is like timing is absolutely crucial, not only in the comp claim, but also for the subrogation piece, because your evidence, as Hope alluded to, it can deteriorate over time or it can be lost. So if you think about the life cycle of a work comp claim, they have a long tail. And you don't really see a lot of that third party movement until that work comp claim is resolved. So you really need to be gathering and preserving that evidence from the jump. And if you, like Hope brought up a really good example there, if you have a valid third party case, just like a work comp case, and the witness testimony is really like the swinging part of the claim, and the decision's predicated on that. But if your witness disappears or they're no longer with a company and you didn't get that statement, you are probably not going to prevail on that, right? Because that is your strength. So your defense is absolutely weakened at that point. So two things that I would just comment on is timing is everything. You got to get it reported as soon as possible and let the experts handle what they do. And then details matter.
Thanks, Chris. And I've seen it multiple times in my career where there's faulty machinery, and the first thing they want to do is like, well, let's get this place safe. Let's get this thing out of here. And they junk it instead of preserving it, and then we don't have the piece of equipment to pursue. So really important stuff to be careful of. Certainly you don't want somebody else to get hurt on it, but there's a way to preserve that. Work with your carrier to make sure that that's taken care of. We are running
too, that's a good circle back to when I lost my train of thought. Is it goes with Sepro, right? As reporting everything, even if you're not sure it's a work comp injury or not. And this goes back to Sepro. We had an incident in a motor vehicle accident. They assumed because it was his personal motor vehicle accident that it was not work related. And then we received the case maybe 8 weeks later. Luckily, we were still able to preserve the truck because it was because of the details of the case. However, report when in doubt. We'd much rather investigate and determine that it's a simple denial rather than being behind the eight ball and missing our opportunity for things such as Sepro.
Thanks, Hope. We are running short on time. so we may run 5 minutes over. So if some people need to hop, I understand that, but there are 2 final questions, and I want to take the time to hit both of those. So first, Quinetta, I want to go back to on-site nurse case managers and where they fit in and when to use them. I know you work a lot with our nurse case managers. They play a very important role on a claim, especially a complicated claim with medical treatments. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap up talking about partnerships, which kind of ties into the question that I got.
So like Greg said, not just on complicated claims, but if there's language barriers or things of that nature, we can send nurse case managers to those appointments. Maybe it's a difficult office. Maybe we're not getting what we need. We don't get the office notes, but that nurse can be there to not only explain to the claimant what is going on, why is the doctor ordering the way he's ordering, why is he doing what he's doing? I just want to go back to work, or why do I have to have continued therapy? Maybe they're not happy with it. So the nurse is there to kind of prevent that barrier, bring everything full circle and say, this is why we're doing it this way. Obtain those orders, get those moving so that we can get quicker return to work. Turnaround times, especially if there's light duty in place. And I cannot stress that enough. Light duty work programs are awesome. As long as we get them doing something, then it prevents that lack of motivation to return, especially the longer a claim goes on. Once diagnostics are completed, she can get those reports to the doctor. So it kind of brings everything full circle. All the challenges, any problems, they can be there at those appointments, even though we can't be everywhere, but it opens up communication between the claimant and the adjuster. And that way everybody's working together for the common goal, which is not only to get the claimant back to work, but for best return to work practices, which I think is great.
Thanks, Quinetta. I can't tell you how many times I've seen in my career where we've had an injured worker go to a doctor's visit, tell the doctor they have no light duty available, and there's certainly light duty available.
Yeah.
So that's where a nurse could really help bridge that gap and say, here's what they have available. And maybe instead of asking the question, what can't they do? We ask the question, what can they do? And nurses can really help fill that goal, that void, and connect to the employer so that we can really have a partnership. And that ties nicely to this last question I had, which also came in from one of the people participating. Is the question was, how often should an adjuster update the employer during a claim? How does this differ from claims that last longer than usual, more than 3 months? And Chris, I'm going to kick that to you, because our final question really was about how partnerships work between brokers, insureds, insurance companies, injured workers. How do we make that work, and what does that look like? And I don't know that there's a one size fits all, but I think you could tackle kind of those 2 concepts together on this one.
Yeah, I think it goes case by case, right? So you're going to probably handle a lost time claim a little bit different than a medical only, and you may have a medical only where you may have an injured worker that's just not as communicative, or there could be struggles on the light duty accommodation. So basically, I rest on this fact: communication's king. You got to be able to set that cadence with your employer. At the very minimum, we need to be updating after every appointment on our lost time claims, go over the restrictions, see if there's any changes, and just make sure that everybody's following the progression of the claim as we go along. So it's not just the injured worker, it's the injured worker and us. It's us partnering with the employer, with the physician, with the broker. Like, everybody is in this wagon wheel together, and we're just kind of moving it forward. So I think it really just depends on the specifics of the claim, what you can initially agree upon about a cadence. There may be a file that you're maybe not as concerned with. I'm also super old school. I would much rather have someone pick up the phone and call me, so we can talk through the details versus going back and forth via email, especially if you get 2-3 emails deep. At that point, maybe you should probably pick up the phone and chat. But I think an open dialogue as the case facts change is imperative to build that trust and that continued relationship going forward.
Thanks, Chris. I'm gonna give one little highlight here to Berkley Industrial, since we're the ones doing the podcast or doing this episode. So one of the things that we pride ourselves in is exactly what Chris said. We want to communicate. We want to be available. There's nothing that will push my buttons or make me more frustrated then when I have to press 3 to press 7 to go on hold, to get transferred, to go back on hold, to get transferred again, to leave a message and then wait for an answer. That's not a partnership. We want to be working together with you to drive those outcomes. And that may look different depending on the claim, depending on the severity of that claim, but we should be talking all the time. And the best outcomes we see are those where an employer's engaged and our adjuster's engaged and the broker's engaged, and we all have the same common goal and we're rowing in the same direction. To that extent, our adjusters run at about 70 claims compared to industry norms of 120, 140 claims. We do that because we're outcome driven. We want to be responsive, and we want to build those relationships. So I hope that as you've listened to this webinar, you've gotten some takeaways. I really hope that if you have questions, you reach back out. We have sent out that survey. You'll see on the screen, there's a QR code. If you scan that, that's going to take you directly into that survey. Help us help you so that we can provide the kind of content that's going to make an impact for your company or your agency. We want to be partners. We really believe in that. And if there's anything we can do to help you, please reach out. And we're here for you. So again, thank you for attending. And we hope you'll either follow the podcast or also reach out to join us for future webinars. And again, please fill out the survey. And thank you so much for your involvement and your engagement.